The military aggression carried out by the Russian Federation against Ukraine has been unprecedented and has sent shockwaves throughout the world. The EU, the UK, the United States, and many other countries swiftly acted with decisive sanctions. Rather than focusing on the usual customs and global trade updates, we focus on the response of the European Union in wake of the Russian aggression. We focus on their sanctions package. There have been a lot of questions as to what does this now mean for my trade with Russia? Can businesses in the European Union, but this would equally apply to the UK and the US, can these businesses still trade with Russia? Can Russian businesses still trade with the European Union? Now, this is early days, the times we record this video. However, a look in the legislation makes it clear. The way we trade, the way global trade offers opportunities for growth, has received a significant setback, and nothing is what it was just a couple of days ago. Let's take a look. If you want to access the laws and the guidances that I will be talking about, then here is the link directly to the EU's and the UK legislation as regards sanctions on Russia. You can, of course, follow us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, Facebook, and you can also see us on Twitter. This week has been a particular week. Now, sanctions against Russia are not new. They date back to the days of the occupation of the Crimea Peninsula, 2014 now. However, this week was particular, and as you can see here, from the 21st of February, so from Monday on, almost every day there were updates and there were new sanctions imposed as developments in Ukraine progressed. And as you can see at the time of this recording, we are at the stage where the leaders of Russia and the foreign minister of Russia were subject to sanctions by the EU, as well as by the UK and other allied countries. If you want to summarize the sanctions against Russia, created a little graph like this, then by today, you have a wide range of significant sanctions that apply against Russia, and that every business in the EU, as well as in the UK, as well as in other parts of the world, and Russia itself needs to be aware of. So for a start, there are more than 700 restricted parties. So what does that mean? Well, it means that these are individuals, entities, organizations, and bodies that are on a list which are subject to asset freeze or restricted opportunities to trade. And you can see here on the screen some of the reason why that is. That list doubled this week. So it's been a significant increase in restricted parties. There's a travel ban applicable to these listed people as well, so they will not be able to enter the European Union, transit through the European Union, and neither to, most of them at least, depending on the lists of the UK, go into the UK, and also won't be able to travel to the United States and other allied countries. There's also, as I said, an asset freeze, and if you hold funds or goods from these individuals, then you as a business will require to freeze them. This mainly affects banks, but could also be you. So that is important. If that affects you, then you need to understand the guidance on asset freezes that the EU has published, and you should take a look at that for sure. There's also an import ban. So this is on not only, it was on non-government controlled, from non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. But since this week, we can't really speak about these areas as being special anymore, because the whole country is now in in a very difficult situation. There's an export ban as well, so sending goods to Russia is not going to be possible for quite a few products now. And the latest news concern financial transactions involving the SWIFT system. So this is an unprecedented amount of sanctions that have occurred, and businesses are right to be confused about what this all means. I will therefore spend the next couple of minutes explaining this in more detail. I hope you don't mind. The economic sanctions that affect Russia affect many businesses in this area as well. So if you are in the oil and gas industry and you've been working with Russia, you may see that your business can no longer continue now. There is a wide range of sectors that are affected. I have here summarized the 6 areas that before the latest developments of this week, meaning the end of February 2022, were already in place. So there was limited access to primary and secondary capital markets. So this was about Russian banks and companies involved in the financial trade. There was already an export and import ban on trade in arms. There was an export ban on dual-use goods for military use and military end use, so specific to military use. There was an export ban on certain technologies in the aviation space and space industry. There was a ban in relation to oil productions and exploration. And there was the ability of Russian state and government to access EU capital and financial markets and services. So what do we now have on the 25th of February, and I think in force now, is an enhanced package. It furthers these sanctions in the area of financial, energy, transport, and technology. So as regards financial, we have sanctions that are expanding the existing financial restrictions, and now they target 70% of all Russian banks, including key state-owned companies. As regards energy, the EU prohibits the sale, supply, transport, and export of Russia of certain goods and technology in the oil refining industry, and has introduced restrictions on the provisions of these services. As regards transport, so this wasn't there before, to that extent, there is a ban on the sale of all aircraft spare parts and equipment to Russian airlines, and an export ban covering goods and technology in the aviation and space industry. So everything gets leveled up and gets increased in intensity. And on technology, there are further restrictions on export of dual-use goods and technology, and that now includes semiconductors and cutting-edge technologies. So the regulation, or the decision, I should say, is the one that was published on the 25th of February 2022, concerning restrictive measures in view of Russia's action destabilizing the situation in Ukraine. And I have reviewed it. And I'll summarize it. It is obviously not the complete regulation. Please refer to it. However, it says, in view of the gravity of the situation and in response to Russia's action destabilizing the situation in Ukraine, it is appropriate to introduce further restrictive measures related to the finance, defense, energy, aviation, and space sectors. So that's quite a wide range of sectors. So I looked a little further into this regulation, this decision, and it talks about the financial restrictions. That's so important for the bank and banks in the finance industry to be aware of. And that access, that limits the access by certain Russian entities to capital markets. And that includes trading of shares of Russian state-owned entities. What's quite interesting and what's quite noteworthy is that There are new measures to limit the financial flows from Russia to the EU, and that relates to the acceptance of deposits exceeding certain values from Russian nationals and residents to holding accounts of Russian clients in the EU. And what that basically means is that sending money from Russia to the EU is going to be made much more difficult. There is a limit or a threshold by which this kicks in, and that's 100,000 euros. There are limited exceptions, of course. Dual use regulations, this is export controls. There are more further sanctions, and if you read the text, it is pretty tough because now all dual use items that are listed on Annex 1 of the dual use regulation 2021 A21 are in scope, you're unable to sell to Russia to get an export license. It is prohibited to send any dual use items to Russia. It is written here, the direct, and please note, it also says the indirect sale. It talks about supply, transfer, or export of all dual use items and technology to any legal or natural person, so this could be an individual, to any entity or body in Russia or for use in Russia by nationals and of member states, or from territories of member states, or using their flag vessels or aircraft shall be prohibited, whether or not in their territories. In other words, there is no more way to send any dual use items to Russia. Now, there are limited exceptions. And of course, everything I say, please read the legal text. I am just summarizing this. And it's quite interesting because here you see how this works. It talks about it is prohibited on top of this, so this was about goods, to provide technical assistance, brokering services, and other services related to the goods and technology referred to in paragraph 1, which was the dual use lists, and the provision, manufacture, maintenance, and use of those goods and technology directly or indirectly to any legal person or any natural person, entity, or body. In other words, from now, it is no longer possible to speak to your Russian counterparts about dual use items in any shape or form. There is no possibility to send emails with blueprints to technicians in Russia. There is no more possibility, at least that's how I'm reading this, anything that constitutes technical assistance, anything where brokering services or any other services can be carried out. This is now prohibited. At least that's how I read the text. If you have other interpretations, please do share them in the comments down below. And if that is not enough, you now have financial assistance related to goods and technologies can no longer be provided. In other words, you will not receive or cannot receive monies for these items. That is how I see this. This is how I read this. In other words, the dual use trade is done. There are limited exceptions, as I mentioned. This applies equally to specific goods and technologies. And this, I just wish to point out to you, reads like this. It shall be prohibited to sell, supply. So even if you don't sell, if you supply, you still can't do it. Transfer, export, and that can be directly, or if you use other parties, indirectly. And it can't be any goods and associated technology which may contribute to Russia's military or technological enhancement, or the development of the defense and security sector, whether or not originating in the Union. This is not a question of origin, and it affects any legal person, entity, or body in Russia, or for use in Russia. So something that is not yet going to Russia, but is intended to be used in Russia, maybe in a couple of weeks, and now it's still only going to, say, Belarus or wherever, that will still be prohibited. And this relates to special technologies for use in oil refining, together with restrictions and provisions of related services. I mentioned the aviation and space industry, and this is an export ban covering goods and technologies suited for the use in aviation and the space industry, as well as to prohibit the provision of insurance and reinsurance and maintenance services in relation to these goods. So you either have these two groups, if you want to think about it. You either have dual use goods, so the goods are prohibited to be exported, but then the associated services like brokering services or technical assistance is also prohibited. And in the second group, as the example of the aviation of the space industry shows, you have, again, a ban on the export of the actual product, but now it is also in relation to any insurance and reinsurance and maintenance services. So it is these two big groups that you can think of. Neither can you supply the goods, neither can you supply and export and the likes of it, the technology. There is no way you're going to get finance through, and there is no way you're going to do insurance, reinsurance, or maintenance services. So, and here you have the mentioning of the technical assistance and other related services, as well as financial and financial assistance. And here you have the words again: sell, supply, transfer, export, directly or indirectly, goods and technology. So, and if you ask what are these activities that you are now not allowed to do, in addition to the what did I mention here? The actual goods. Well, maintenance can mean overhaul, repair, inspection, replacement, modification, defect, rectification of an aircraft component, etc., etc. So on all of these goods, these are actions you can no longer carry out. In the oil refining sector, again, we have the same situation. Goods and technologies suitable for use in the oil refining sector. Now there's clarity more or less as to what these goods are, because that's written in the regulation. But again, it's made clear that technical assistance, brokering services, or any services and financial assistance or financing is not allowed. And then finally, there's a word on public financing or financial assistance, and it is impossible to provide any public financing or financial assistance for trade with Russia. So any aid that the governments of the day may have provided to you with the trade with Russia, any support, is no longer available. There are some exceptions. And the Article 8 on circumvention also gets amended, and there you go. Don't try to circumvent this. The second big aspect, so we talked a lot about the economic sanctions. The second big aspect concerns individual sanctions. And this is the other second big part of what you need to know. So there are the economic sanctions on one part, and then there are the individual sanctions on the other part, on the other side. And as of 27th of February 2022, there are 654 individual sanctions and 52 entities listed in the EU. And when an individual, as I mentioned previously, is listed, it means there's an asset freeze, and there's a prohibition of making funds available to these listed entities and individuals. And in addition, there's a travel ban that's applicable. If you want to know who's on that list and you want to screen your partners that you work with in Russia against the list, you can use automated software. And if you need some support on what software to get and how you're going to get that, then you can reach out to us. We'd be pleased to help. And if you're not into investing money in order to screen against these individuals on a regular basis, then there is a document that you can access, and that's the European Union Consolidated Financial Sanctions List. And we have uploaded that onto our expert blog. If you want to download this, the link is here below. So the question, I suppose, then is, what are you going to do with all of that? How do you now manage this new reality? And how is a business going to prepare for trading with Russia, or what now happens? Well, there is no way around it. You cannot execute any of these provisions, or these bans, these restrictions. You cannot trade with individuals that have been listed, and this is all for companies in the EU. And for the UK and for the US, you need to check the relevant regulations that apply. In the UK, this would be SAMLA, and in the US, the corresponding regulations. However, there's very close alignment between the UK, the EU, and the US on this matter. So it is plausible that very similar activities occur there. So what companies now need to do and need to beef up potentially is due diligence checks. If you're willing to engage in business activities with Russia or Russian companies, well, you're advised to carry out due diligence checks to ensure that the planned activities do not violate EU restrictive measures, sanctions, and they are bound to apply because they're enforced by EU law. So, for example, there's an increased risk of interference with EU sanctions when dealing with dual-use goods, as I mentioned, including transportation and telecommunication sectors, amongst others. So, without carrying out these due diligence checks, you might find it difficult to meet the stringent requirements of financial sanctions as well, including from EU banks. And financial institutions will be unwilling to provide a credit to business projects if they identify any risk of non-compliance with EU sanctions. So due diligence checks are therefore crucial for businesses that still continue to plan to carry out business in Russia. Now, we do offer a due diligence check on EU sanctions and UK sanctions and US sanctions for these specific business projects you may have. And it allows you to correctly assess whether your initiative in Russia is in accordance with EU law. And you can use this due diligence check report that you're going to get from us to reassure financial institutions of the legitimacy of the business project, enabling you to obtain funds and carry out actual transactions. So if you wanted to explore that a little more, then please get in touch with us. How it would work is we'll have you provide some information, and we'll contact, if you allow, your Russian counterparty. We'll talk to them about the Russian, they would check the transaction and see to what extent, what kind of transaction that is. And that allows us then to issue you the report on the due diligence. And here are the 5 steps that we would undertake in order to develop this compliance report, right? So if you are willing to answer questions, they are willing to answer questions, then we would be able to carry out the necessary research, do open source checks, professional compliance data sets, look also at on-the-ground expertise to the extent that we still can. And usually that takes a couple of weeks to complete, depending on the complexity of each case. And if that's not for you and you want to still do something, then what we recommend is that you look at the best practices for the effective implementation of sanctions. The EU has released a report, quite comprehensive. You can see this here. There you see the 3 pillars, the A, the designation, identification of persons and entities subject to target restrictive measures. You have financial restrictive measures here, what happens with finance, and then 3C, the provisions regarding the provision of goods. And the reference is here. And if you want to download this, you can also download it by clicking on the link below. That is it. We have focused all our attention on the developments of this week, sanctions against Russia. You have here the details on how you can stay in touch, and we would greatly appreciate it. Now, this has been an extraordinary work week, and it has left us deeply disturbed. We will be checking the OJ for last week and next week, and we'll report on that in one of the following updates. Thank you for your understanding.